ураган обещают.
А у нас крышу не снесет?
Снесет, починим. У нас все застраховано.
The price of phones is going up fast, but why? Like, how can Apple get away with charging nearly $1,500 for a top-spec iPhone? Or Samsung, $1,600 for an S20 Ultra? And maybe more confusing for some is OnePlus, a company that has built their entire reputation on creating affordable flagships. Their latest phone is $1,000. Is the world going crazy? Are we going to be lining up in a few years' time to sell our organs so we can afford the next phone? Well, maybe. But the point is, what I'm trying to say here is that while I'm not going to defend high pricing, there are 7 key reasons why phones are getting so expensive that I just don't think a lot of people are acknowledging. Also, massive thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. The first thing is Qualcomm. Qualcomm are the guys who make the Snapdragon chipsets that power pretty much every high-end Android phone, and while they clearly make amazing hardware, they also cause a bit of a cost problem. See, they have no competition. If a company like OnePlus wants to have the best performance, then they've got no option but to use whatever Qualcomm's latest Snapdragon chipset is, in this case the 865. And then because Qualcomm's got all this power, this year they've basically told companies, if you want to have our chip, then you've also got to buy our expensive 5G modem to go alongside it. So whether or not a smartphone maker wants 5G, they're paying for it. And it gets worse, because as well as the chip and the modem, Qualcomm will also give you a set of guidelines. The big one being that your phone needs to have a large amount of space inside it. So if you're wondering why smartphones, especially this year, are leaping up in size, this might well be part of the reason. Because you've got to remember, a company can't just make their phone taller and keep everything else the same. They've then got to make the screen bigger, so people don't complain about a massive board around the sides. And then they've got to have a bigger battery to power this display, as well as the more power-hungry Snapdragon chip. And then add to all of that, if the company actually wants to take advantage of that 5G modem they've paid for, then they've got to buy additional radio frequency modules and put them all around the phone. This costs money. So if you're wondering why OnePlus has suddenly hiked up the prices for their latest phones, I would guess that at least a part of that is Qualcomm steering them in that direction. Also, if you're enjoying the video, by the way, a sub to the channel would be amazing. Number 2, the second thing, is that smartphones are getting better. And that sounds like common sense, obviously, they're not getting worse, but I feel like when a lot of people complain about the prices of these phones, they're actually missing this point. See, technology is going to improve each year. So it's true, if every year Samsung just released the exact same phone but with slightly more up-to-date technologies each time, we probably should expect prices to stay fairly constant. But that's not what's happening. It's not just a case that each year we see a slight internal spec bump to keep up with the times. If it was, our smartphones would still look like this. Every year we get designs that push boundaries further, more intelligent cameras, more advanced materials, and naturally that's got to cost more. Not to mention that phones now have like 3 times the screen area of when they started, so as well as all that new tech, everything else has to be scaled up accordingly. And remember, whilst it is getting more expensive to buy the highest end phone each year, it's getting cheaper to buy a good smartphone each year. There's probably no better example of my point than this. In the US, the average price of a smartphone has fallen every year continuously since 2011. Because phones are getting so much better, people no longer need to buy the highest end. So every year they can get away with spending less and less. Because the highest end phones are the ones people talk about and the ones that grab the headlines, it creates this kind of distorted view that all phones are more expensive. When all that's really happening is the high end is becoming higher. But now that's out of the way, why are these top-end phones just so expensive? Well, one important thing is selling costs. The actual process of selling a phone can cost companies a ton of money, which also has to get added to the price. Let's take the absolute top-end iPhone 11 Pro Max. You can get this for around $1,380 in Mexico, but here in the UK, you'll pay the equivalent of $1,880. There's an element of current selling a phone can cost companies a ton of money, which also has to get added to the price. Let's take the absolute top-end iPhone 11 Pro Max. You can get this for around $1,380 in Mexico, but here in the UK, you'll pay the equivalent of $1,880. There's an element of currency conversions in those differences, but it's mostly 2 things. Sales taxes. In most countries, whenever a product is sold, the government takes a cut. In the US, it's pretty low. Most states sit at around 7%, but in the UK, it's 20%. And then there's operational costs. The costs of running a store, the costs of hiring employees. This varies massively based on the country. These selling costs are a big part of why here in the UK, we get a terrible deal compared to, for example, people in India. Like, for example, this top-end OnePlus 8 Pro is the equivalent of $1,120 here in the UK. In India, $785. It also helps in this case that India is where a lot of OnePlus phones are actually put together, but hopefully you're starting to see just how much of a difference these selling costs alone can make to a phone's price. But there's more, because every aspect of the chain of production of a smartphone is expensive, and it's getting more expensive. As an example, take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S20. The phone's priced at £800 here in the UK, but its bill of components will be around £340 based on past years. So, its bill of an example, take the chain of production of a smartphone is expensive, and it's getting more expensive. As an example, take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S20. The phone's priced at £800 here in the UK, but its bill of components will be around £340 based on past years. So, it would be easy to look at this and think Samsung is making £460 of profit per phone, which would be great, but also wrong. For starters, after you take out the sales tax, which is included in that £800 price, Samsung's only actually taking about £640. But okay, that's still a fair bit of money, but remember, that component cost is only one of many, many costs. You've got manufacturing, the machines, the factories, the production lines, they all have to be rented or bought. You've got the employees, everyone from the people that put the phones together to the people who solve your problems over the phone.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Plus, as chipsets become more and more minute and sophisticated, the failure rate is higher. As things stand with the current chips based on a 7nm fabrication process, about 30% of them stand with the current chips based on a 7nm fabrication.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Plus, as chipsets become more and more minute and sophisticated, the failure rate is higher. As things stand with the current chips based on a 7nm fabrication process, about 30% of them fail. They just have to be chucked or maybe potentially recycled. Research and development. You've got to remember that for every beautiful finish you see on a retail phone, a company's tried 15 ones that they eventually scrapped. For every successful feature, like 100x zoom on the S20 Ultra, there's been 5 or 6 ones that never saw the light of day. And then advertising costs. I've seen this one firsthand. I'm not allowed to tell you which brand it was for, but last year I was on set for a commercial for a smartphone launch, and it was crazy. The company had rented out an entire warehouse. They'd got a Hollywood film production crew. They'd got like 100 actors and extras on that set, and yet, after it was all done and edited, they just cancelled the project because apparently it no longer fit the message they wanted to send for their phone. Plus, the retailers who then end up selling you the Samsung phones, like Amazon, like T-Mobile, they're going to want to... Plus, like 100 the company had rented out an entire warehouse. They'd got a Hollywood film production crew. They'd got like 100 actors and extras on that set. And yet, after it was all done and edited, they just cancelled the project because apparently it no longer fit the message they wanted to send for their phone. Plus, the retailers who then end up selling you the Samsung phones, like Amazon, like T-Mobile, they're going to want to take their own 5 to 10% cut on top of that. So, after all these costs, Samsung doesn't make 150% profit like it initially seems. Not even 50. If I had to guess, I would say 10% per phone on average. They'll make more money on their top-end phones, like the higher storage. Say 10% per phone on average. They'll make more money on their top-end phones, like the higher storage options and their S20 Ultra, but this figure gives you an idea. Apart from Apple, who benefits from having full control over every part of what goes into their phones, most smartphone makers have seen profits falling, not rising. But there is still profit, and when you take a step back, considering the volumes of phones these companies sell, it's a lot of money. And while so far I've told you some legitimate reasons why prices should be rising, there is also an element of craftiness from the end of the companies. Something that I'm going to call the luxury effect. And it started with the iPhone X. Up until the iPhone X, Apple's phone pricing followed a fairly uninteresting trend. The first iPhone started at $500, and this price slowly trickled upwards, but barely. Even nearly 10 years on with the iPhone 7, you could still buy it for $649, but that changed the year after. In 2017, Apple pulled a bit of a fast one. They launched 3 phones, an iPhone 8 to replace the 7, an 8 Plus to replace the 7 Plus, and these 2 phones were similarly priced last year, but then also the iPhone X at $1,000. And they got away with it. The way they... They pitch their phones with the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus, there are flagships, there are replacements if you wanted to upgrade from the 7 and the 7 Plus, but the iPhone X, well, that's a luxury item. Even though Apple knew full well the iPhone X would sell by the bucket load, by pitching this as the luxury phone, the optional extra, they avoided people comparing its price to their past phones. They made it seem incomparable. And then following this move, the entire market reacted. Samsung, for example, saw the opportunity to hike up the price of their phones. And more recently, their S20 Ultra uses this exact same luxury effect to get away with its price tag of up to $1,600. Because Samsung also released a Galaxy S20 and an S20 Plus, which sit as the technical replacements for last year's S10 and S10 Plus, they can dodge the price comparison $1,600. Because Samsung luxury effect to get away with its price tag of up to $1,600. Because Samsung also released a Galaxy S20 and an S20 Plus, which sit as the technical replacements for last year's S10 and S10 Plus, they can dodge the price comparisons by saying that the Ultra is just unlike anything else out there. Okay, so cost of production is rising. Companies are getting craftier with their pricing, but there's still a missing piece of the puzzle. If these top-end phones are so expensive, why are people still buying them? I mean, in terms of pre-orders, the highest-end S20 Ultra made up 50% of the sales of the whole S20 lineup. But why? Why is it all of a sudden that people's willingness to pay for a phone has grown? Well, it's kind of simple. Phones are becoming, every year, more and more beneficial to us. And this price hike is just a case of companies like Samsung and Apple seeing that and taking advantage of it. Think about this. When the first iPhone was introduced, you could take it or leave it. It was a cool way of doing stuff that similar devices could already do. But now, for a lot of people, living without a smartphone would be like living without a limb. I'd go as far as to say that there's a lot of people out there who gain more value from their smartphone than they do their car. The smartphone has already replaced a lot of people's need for a camera, for a speaker, for a tablet, for an MP3 player, and I just think as the smartphone becomes more and more intelligent, it'll start to swallow up more and more product categories, becoming ever more useful to the end user. Bit of an extreme example, but Warren Buffett, famous American businessman, he's gone on record to say that he'd rather keep his iPhone over his airplane, that his $1,000 phone gives him more value than his multi-million-dollar aircraft. And finally, just inflation. The price of almost every type of product rises over time naturally. That applies to gold, that applies to chocolate, that applies to smartphones. And while the rising price of phones has exceeded inflation, inflation is a part of it. Okay, so about a year ago, Surfshark VPN contacted me and asked me if I wanted to partner with them. And I distinctly remember thinking, I've not heard of Surfshark VPN, but I'll give it a go, see if I like it. And I did. It does everything you need a VPN to do, like give you that peace of mind that your browsing is secure and anonymous. Also, I'd be traveling around the world for launch events, and I'd be using this to access UK Netflix while I'm sitting in China, for example. So that's fine. But now that I've been using it for about a year, it's becoming pretty clear that some, not all, but some VPNs are just daylight robbery. They'll charge you like $20 to $30 per person per month for VPN access. Surfshark costs $1.99 a month for an unlimited amount of simultaneous connections. And there are some unique features too. You've got HackLog, which is a feature designed to give you alerts should your password or email be compromised, ensuring that the first person to take action is you. And I like that using the Surfshark app on my MacBook, I can tap once in the bar at the top and quick connect to the last server I was connected to. So, check the link in the description and use the code BOSS, because there's now an even bigger discount than ever. It's 85% off and an extra 3 months for free. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Нет, да. Да наоборот, просто...
Что есть красота? Случайная встреча, что чарует чувства, до боли сладкие поцелуи. Кто-то умирает за красоту.
Okay, I love me some Sony, but this should win an award for narrowest target demographic of all time. Hey, what's up? I'm KBHD here, and this is a brand new smartphone from Sony. It's called the Sony Xperia Pro. So a lot of you guys may remember I pretty recently did a video on why people don't buy Sony phones, where I gave their recent phones a lot of credit and admired how technically impressive they were, but I eventually landed basically on the conclusion that people don't buy these because they're focused on enthusiast features at the expense of the everyday normal experience. There's just not a recipe for selling a lot of them. So then they dropped this new phone, and this phone takes that imbalance farther than any phone I've ever seen, for all the good and all the bad. So just looking at this guy, the phone itself is pretty understated. It doesn't seem that special right off the top. It's basically an Xperia 1 Mark II again, which was a great phone, but it's a year old now, so it's the same Snapdragon 865, same internal specs, same 4K display, same triple camera system on the back, but as you can kind of start to see, it's modified in a few key ways, and it costs $2,500. Okay, hold on a second. It's called the Pro, and we know that the Pro phones are the highest end ones, the best of the best, so what's so special about this one, right? Hot take, this phone is the only real Pro phone. It's the only phone that deserves the word Pro in the name. Okay, so we have iPhone 12 Pro, cool, Huawei Mate 40 Pro, nice, OnePlus 8 Pro, but those phones are just using the word Pro to sell you, upscale everyday phones. This phone is an actual professional tool. So it starts with the design. Right at the bottom of this phone, you'll find a literal HDMI port. So that's a micro HDMI plug behind this flap alongside the USB Type-C. So you don't see that very often, so keep this in mind. And then instead of straight glass and metal, this phone is coated in this black polycarbonate jacket all the way around, on the sides, on the back, even on the front. And it's pretty nice actually. There's no camera bump, so the phone sits perfectly flat, and honestly you probably don't even really need a case for this phone. It's kind of ruggedized that way. You do lose wireless charging for some reason, but as you'll see pretty soon, that's not a huge concern. Then last but not least, this phone has an array of 5G antennas. You have 4 beam-forming antennas all the way around this phone that no doubt take advantage of the plastic jacket instead of metal or glass. That's way better for reception, and all of that is packed into a body just a little bit bigger than the previous Xperia 1 Mark II. So this phone is designed to act as a primary viewfinder for a Sony mirrorless camera, or really any camera with HDMI for that matter. So they've built custom software and hardware into the phone to make it happen. So when you put it all together, it looks something like this. Not super elegant, but not too bad. Just very technically impressive. So the phone connects to the camera via that HDMI port. There's a custom app with an extra custom button on the side of the phone to trigger it, and immediately you get the 4K HDMI feed on the phone. Now, a couple things about this. Number one, that's pretty sweet. A lot of creators out there have a mirrorless camera already and a smartphone, so combining these two to have a nicer display makes a lot of sense. But then number two, the special 5G workflow pieces built in will let you do crazy things. It'll let you live stream with this 4K full frame quality to sites like Twitch and YouTube, and with services like StreamYard, Streamlabs, which is sick. It's the awesome, freeing feeling of not being tied to your computer anymore and still getting live full frame quality. That's so cool. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can even add USB-C from the phone to the camera too. And this phone's 4,000 milliamp hour battery will act as a power bank for the camera, extending its battery life. And that also enables FTP transfer. So if you're live blogging, like taking a bunch of high resolution photos, those photos go straight to the phone and then can be sent resolutely. And that also enables FTP transfer. So if you're live blogging, like taking a bunch of high resolution photos, those photos go straight to the phone and then can be sent straight to the truck or straight online from the 5G of the phone itself. So that's all sweet and pretty unheard of. But at the same time, this is, like I said, a little bit inelegant. You do need a cage to attach anything like this to the A7S III, so I've used the A7S. And so now you have a hot shoe mount that connects to the phone. I happen to use a hot shoe microphone, so I've had to put the mount on the side. The weight distribution's a little bit off, but it's not horrible. There's a lot of screws and mounts involved to moving things around to put it on the side, Took a few minutes to set up and get just right, but we got it done. But then once it's set up, the HDMI output renders the touchscreen on the camera itself useless since it's off, and it only outputs one at a time. So since there's no touch controls transferred by HDMI, you do get menu control through the buttons still, and you can see all that stuff, but there's no touch to select, and you lose touch to focus for photos and videos. The one thing you do get is the ability to zoom in on the actual literal HDMI feed and use it as a focus assist, but that's nowhere near as powerful as focus peaking or false color, which are built into some more pro monitors. And then it just kind of feels off that the HDMI feed doesn't even take up the whole display on the phone. Like it's a 21:9 display still. And unless they're shooting 21:9 video, it's just gonna feel like there's a lot of wasted space that you can't use for other things. So this phone simultaneously became the most comprehensive, professional, durable, pro tool I've ever seen as a phone, and the most niche phone of all time. So that $2,500 price seems wildly high, because when you look at it as a phone with a few cool tricks up its sleeve, that is crazy high. Most phones are $1,000 at the high end, $1,200 to $1,500, and if you do something really crazy like fold in half, maybe you can justify being $2,000. So that looks really expensive. But if you're a professional or a creator, or you're in this world already and you've ever shopped for an external monitor for your mirrorless camera, then you know how hard it is to find a 4K OLED viewfinder that's this thin, that has an all-day battery life, that can charge your camera, that has 5G built in, and has custom software for transcoding and uploading huge video files and photos straight to the internet. So $2,500 seems like a deal. And that's really just because it's such a technical rarity. Really nothing else does that. It's already just hard to find a good OLED viewfinder. Most of those aren't 4K. Most of those have a battery life of about half an hour tops, and then none of those have 5G built in. So when you make something that no one else makes, who's to say it's overpriced? There is no equivalent to compare it to. I just looked on Small HD's site. One of their nicest monitors is this 7-inch HDR on-camera monitor, but it's not 4K, and it's not OLED, and it's $3,000. So this...
Все херня. Что ты делаешь народу? Да. Ну, я понял. Самое умное, самое умное. Да.
This phone earns the pro name more than any other phone out there, no doubt about that. But the sad thing is, as a professional myself, even I am not in the extremely narrow target demographic for a setup like this. Like, I would rather take that small HD monitor that's a little brighter and has that little bit of a larger viewing area and those professional tools like waveforms and false color over the 5G that this has. So my theory, my take, is there's about 30 people in the target demographic for this phone, and they all work in NFL stadiums as those photographers down on the field, videographers who need this whole setup, and they're sending live video and live photos right up to the truck and to the broadcast, and they need that type of speed immediately from their viewfinder. Those people should get a Sony Xperia Pro. But for pretty much everyone else, the screen isn't quite bright or big enough, the app is a little bit too buggy, the compatibility is a little too rough, and this just probably isn't what you need, no matter what the price is. And even framing it as a smartphone with extra cool features probably won't help that. This ultimately falls perfectly into the thesis of my original Sony video about why people don't buy their phones, which is that they make things that are really technically impressive and that no one else is actually doing in a lot of ways. It's just the target demographic is so small that they're not going to sell a ton of these. So I would say definitely check out that video. It'll be the first link with a like button if you want to watch it. Sheds a little more light on the more specifics of the last gen of this phone, and there are parts shared in this one. But that explains the whole theory for detail too. It's just, I don't know, as a professional, I like seeing stuff made for professionals, but I just think the packaging of it as a smartphone is a little bit odd. Either way, that's pretty much it for me. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.